Hello there, welcome to the Comets collaborative project of Espreso.Global and Ukrainian media. I am Olena Solodovnikova, and it's great pleasure for me to welcome Evgen Chely, a lawyer and the president of the NGO Ukraine 2050. Hello, Evgen.
Hello, how are you?
Not bad, how are you?
Hey, thank you.
Today we talk about big money which belong to the aggressor country. The assets of Russia's central bank frozen by the Western countries are alone worth 2,060 billion euros. The West is actively discussing the transfer of at least a percentage of frozen Russian assets to Ukraine. Could you please remind us when and by whom these assets were frozen?
So currently what is being discussed is this, as you know, when the Russia started its military invasion and ultimately all-out war, which was coined correctly by the President of the United States and by various countries as a genocide. Western authorities have frozen Russian assets abroad, and currently just the assets of the Russia central bank alone that are frozen abroad total over 260 billion euros. And in 2023, the financial return or the revenues on just a portion of those assets in just one central securities depository was about 4.4 billion euros. So this, we're talking, as you correctly started, with very important amounts of dollars. And I say that Western authorities are currently examining various scenarios, how to now tap into those frozen assets. And three scenarios are being analyzed. One is to tax the frozen assets. The second one is to unfreeze the yearly financial return of the frozen assets. And the third one is to use the frozen assets as collateral for loans to Ukraine. So those are the issues that are being debated today. From my perspective, all of the various avenues that are being explored ultimately do not want to immediately tap into the frozen assets themselves. So we're talking about revenues, we're talking about taxing the assets, but not the full amount of the assets. From my perspective, I think that the international community and the countries that have frozen those assets should be aware that on March 16, 2022, the International Court of Justice in The Hague has rendered an order whereby a judgment, an interim judgment, stating that the Russian Federation shall immediately suspend the military operations that it commenced in Ukraine on February 24, 2022. And since then, Russia has violated this order blatantly, as well as the various calls by the international community's resolutions from international bodies for Russia to stop its genocidal war against Ukraine. Russia has defiantly violated all those calls, and has committed acts of genocide, including the forceful deportation of Ukrainian children to Russia, for which the International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant against Russia's president on March 17, 2023. So what I'm saying is that you take into consideration all of these resolutions and the judgment, and the Western authorities should now give Russia a deadline, a specific deadline, a reasonable deadline to cease its military invasion of Ukraine, withdraw all its military from all Ukrainian territories, return to Ukraine all prisoners of war and all Ukrainian children that were forcibly deported to Russia. And if Russia fails to comply with this deadline, the predetermined amount of frozen assets would be forfeited daily and transferred to Ukraine. From my perspective, that would be the maximizing the value of those frozen assets. It would also give teeth to the judgment that was rendered by the International Court and the various resolutions, and put pressure on Russia to stop its genocidal war against Ukraine. That, from my perspective, would be compliant both with Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which allows for collective self-defense, and of the resolution of the UN General Assembly of 2001 that was titled Responsibility of States for Internationally Wrongful Acts. And I think that gives enough ammunition, legal ammunition, and for the Western authorities that have frozen those assets to give such a deadline on Russia, to force Russia to stop its invasion of Ukraine, and to indemnify Ukraine with Russian assets for the damages that it has caused, and that the Prime Minister of Ukraine, with the World Bank, has established on a preliminary basis to surpass 500 billion euros.
Exactly, but I wanted to clarify that main economic argument against the confiscation the resource of Russian central bank was it could be lead to financial destabilization in the world. Would it really be the case?
I don't think so. I think that we have all the tools that are necessary to ensure that there is compliance with an international order. You cannot have a country like Russia blatantly disregarding the UN Charter, blatantly disregarding all its international obligations, blatantly committing acts of genocide without suffering the consequences of such conduct. And I think that Russia should rather think that its actions are destabilizing the international order, and not those actions that are recommended in order to indemnify Ukraine and to stop Russia from violating the international order.
I completely agree. Since Russia doesn't recognize any international legal rights, how can it call for international legal protection and other else? Because they said, oh, the group of refers to international law and other experience fears financial destabilization. As for me, that is some kind of cynically thinking from them.
Well, I think that Russia is simply acting in a manner that is disruptive of the international order, and the measures that I have just discussed with you are logical measures to take in order to ensure compliance by Russia with the international order, to which it has committed itself to.
Yes, and what is your stance? How will the Ukraine be able to use these funds for military needs or just for civilian needs? There are different options.
I think if the recommendation that I have given, that if Western authorities do give Russia a deadline to comply with the International Court's order to stop its invasion, if Russia does not comply with that order and by the deadline given by Western authorities, certain amounts, predetermined amounts on a daily basis should be confiscated and sent to Ukraine, and Ukraine should be able to send them, to use them, first to protect its territorial integrity, and eventually to use in order to rebuild after the huge damage that Russia has caused with its numerous drone and rocket attacks on Ukrainian civil infrastructure, and for the past 2 years, and actually for now 10 years, if one counts the initial invasion of Crimea and a portion of eastern Ukraine.
What is the black swan we really need to speed up these processes?
Well, I think that the international community is already currently looking at solutions. We've heard statements from various leaders on how to do it. I think it takes political will, and I think that that will hopefully will materialize within the next weeks, so that there could be that those assets could be used properly. Like I said, hopefully first to help Ukraine protect its territorial integrity, force Russia to stop its invasion, and then used to rebuild Ukraine for the devastation that has been caused by Russia.
Yes, in general, do you think that sanctions imposed on Russia have been effective? It seems that this is a mechanism doesn't work at all.
Imposing sanctions has worked. I think that very often what we see is that certain sanctions have unfortunately holes, and those obviously need to be closed in order for sanctions to be more effective. But I would certainly say that sanctions have been effective. They have not been as effective as they could be if they were more scrupulously enforced by Western authorities.
Could you talk a little bit more about the holes, for example, for instance, what holes they use?
Well, you still have companies that are sending various equipment to Russia, and clearly those are sanctions. Those are actions that should be sanctioned in order for Russia not to be benefiting from any supply from Western countries while it's committing a genocide.
Yes, unfortunately. I would like to ask you about the nationalization of Russian assets. There are cases are numerous, but not everyone is satisfied. For example, Mikhail Friedman is suing Ukraine over the nationalization of his bank. As international practice has shown, there are his chances of getting this former property back.
I would need to look at the arguments, but I think that the actions that Ukraine is doing, Ukraine is using basically the tools that it has in order to fight a genocide. When you're fighting a genocide and when the existence of the Ukrainian nation is at stake, you take every measure that's available in order to defend yourself. And I think that that is what Ukraine is doing. And Ukraine currently, as we have seen, for the last 2 years, has been the object of a vicious attack with various genocidal acts that have been committed. 97% of the drone and rocket attacks have been aimed at civil infrastructure. So Ukraine is taking what is both in a military, technical, economic, legal tools that at its disposal in order to protect its territorial integrity.
If we talk about the not concrete businessmen, but businessmen from Russia who said, okay, I'm have my own business, I'm not in part of aggression politics, what does his chances to sue to our country and back his business, his money?
Well, like I said, I think that each of those cases need to be scrutinized by the Ukrainian courts, and I'm sure that Ukrainian courts will address these issues in a manner that is compliant with international norms.
Yes, and another big case that tribunal in Hague has ordered Russia to pay 5 billion in compensation to Naftogaz for its losses and lost property in Crimea. This refers to the reimbursement of assets used to develop gas fields and other strategically important infrastructure of Ukraine, which became one of the main targets of aggression during the occupation of Ukraine peninsula 9 years ago. And what are the changes that Ukraine will receive this compensation? Because their decision can be enforced in any country that is subject to New York Convention.
Well, correct. I mean, I think that as you've properly pointed out, it's one thing to obtain a favorable judgment or order, and then the next step, which is also a challenge, is to enforce it by taking various measures. And there are mechanisms which recognize such orders, and Ukraine needs to avail itself, and I'm sure it's doing it right now, of those mechanisms to find the assets and to actually seize and confiscate in virtue of that order.
For the end, if we talk about the reparation after the victory, after the First World War, not only German state assets were confiscated, but also all German private assets outside Germany. How should Ukraine make Russia to pay additional war repatriations?
Well, I think that from my perspective, and I'm glad that you said that once, because clearly Ukraine will be victorious. And I think that the current biggest challenge is for Ukraine to get the support of the international community in order to achieve that victory as quickly as possible, because that will have two important consequences. One is that it will stop the devastation in Ukraine, the killings of Ukrainian people, and that's the most important consequence that we all want to attain. The second one is to ensure that there's fair reparation for the damage that has been caused, and I think the international community should help Ukraine to ensure that Russia complies with its obligations and compensates Ukraine for all of the damages that have been caused. The international community will also have to come up with something similar as after the Second World War. Some form of a Marshall Plan that will ensure that Ukraine can rebuild as quickly as possible, and for Ukrainians to be living normal lives.
Yes, but what if Russia breaks up into several independent states? Who will be a successor on the Russian state in this case? Who will be give us repatriations?
Well, I think that you're bringing up a scenario that one would have to analyze, and there are legal consequences that will follow depending on how if such split would occur immediately after Ukraine's victory. One would have to analyze and then to ensure that proper reparation is done by the correct legal successor to Russia's state.
Thanks a lot. That was a pleasure for me to talk with you, and I hope you join us next time.